Welcome everyone to our 6th day in the book of Leviticus. We've got free PDF handouts for all of these chapters, and there's a link down to our website in the description. You can get them all for free. When did the events of this chapter take place? We are in approximately 1490 BC, and that's pretty much the year that we're going to be sticking with for the rest of the book of Leviticus. So 1490 BC, about 1500 years before Jesus. We've got two terms to define in this chapter. The first one is scoured. Scouring something is to clean the inside of a container by scrubbing it hard, usually with some kind of soap or abrasive. And then the second one, frankincense. You've probably heard of this one before, is one of the gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus when they came to see him. Frankincense is an aromatic resin that's harvested from the boswellia tree. It has been used for generations to make incense and perfumes. At the beginning of chapter 6, we're continuing to talk about the guilt offering. And so verses 1 through 7 are continued instructions for how the Israelites were supposed to make their guilt offerings. If a man sinned in some specific ways, for example, by deceiving his neighbor, oppressing his neighbor, by robbing someone, by not returning something that was lost and then lying about it, or in other ways that were specified, he was guilty before God. And when he realized his guilt, he was to make restitution, and he was to add 1/5 of the total value to what he restored. He was then to bring a ram without blemish to the tabernacle as a guilt offering, and the priest would make atonement for him, and if he did all those things, he would be forgiven. God then gave a few more instructions about the burnt offering. I think we talked about the burnt offering way back in chapter 2. So this is verses 8 through 13. The fire on the bronze altar that was in the courtyard of the tabernacle, it was never to go out. It was to burn continually. Animals that were offered on the altar of burnt offering were to be left there all night. And then in the morning, their ashes were to be taken outside of the camp of Israel and placed in a clean place. Next up in verses 14 through 18, some additional instructions for offering grain offerings. So you remember flour was supposed to be brought for these grain offerings, and a handful of that flour was to be burned on the bronze altar. The remaining part of the flour belonged to the priests. The priests were to bake the flour into bread, but it was not to be leavened. And Aaron and his sons were to eat the bread inside the court of the tabernacle. Verses 19 through 23 describe a special offering that was supposed to be made the day of anointing. So when Aaron was anointed the high priest, the priests were to offer 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a grain offering, half in the morning and half in the evening. The flour was to be mixed with oil and then cooked on a griddle, and all of the bread was to be burned on the altar. This particular offering was supposed to be offered by the son of Aaron, who was selected to take his place when his father died. And then finally, some additional instructions for sin offerings, verses 24 through the end of the chapter. When an animal was killed for a sin offering, the priest who offered it was supposed to take some of the meat of the animal and eat it. If the meat was boiled in an earthenware vessel, if that's the way that it was cooked, the vessel was to be broken afterwards. If the meat was cooked in a bronze vessel, the vessel was to be scoured and then rinsed. The meat was to be eaten inside the court of the tabernacle. It wasn't supposed to be taken out. And if any of the animal's blood got on the priest's garments, the priest was to wash the garments in a holy place. So that is Leviticus chapter 6. We've got some additional instructions for the sacrifices. So when you're trying to put all of these pieces together, how these offerings were supposed to be done, you have to take the information that we've already read and add it to the information that we read in chapter 6. And then there's going to be some additional information as well that we'll pick up through the Bible. So make sure to read it comprehensively. Okay, now for our application. I want to use this application section to recap the different kinds of offerings that we've read about in Leviticus thus far. It's easy to lose track of them, and especially as you go through the rest of the book. Right, so I just wanted to document them here just to kind of clarify and to make sure that people weren't getting lost. So in Leviticus chapter 1 through 6, we talk about the food offering quite a bit. We talk about the burnt offering in Leviticus chapter 1. In chapter 2, it was the grain offering. Chapter 2 as well, there was the offering of first fruits, which was a type of grain offering, if I understand it correctly, just a special kind. Leviticus chapter 3 is the peace offerings. Chapter 4 and chapter 5, the sin offerings, and then the guilt offerings in Leviticus 5 and 6. So if you are all over the place trying to figure those out, I just wanted to put those down here for clarification. All right, that's Leviticus 6, and hopefully I will see you tomorrow for Leviticus chapter 7.